Ayi-yu-kwee, Melita, and this is my channel, The Midnight Librarian. And today I will be talking about my review of Winter Counts by David Heska Wanbley-Wyden. Now, before I get into my review, I just want to say that this is an Own Voices book and that David Heska Wanbley-Wyden is part of the Lakota Nation and writes about Lakota characters in his book. However, this is not an Own Voices review, as I am Yurok. Indigenous tribes, nations, and peoples are not monolithic. We all have our own teachings, belief systems, and experiences. And although they may overlap in some similarities, we're all very much different. So I do not consider this an Own Voices review. I do consider it an Indigenous review. So please bear that in mind going into this review. I will leave other Indigenous reviewers down in my description down below. I also want to give thanks to Echo Books for sending me my advanced reader's copy. I very much appreciate it. This book has been released already back in August and was actually one of the options for Book of the Month. So if you haven't picked this book up, and you should, and I'll get into the reasons why here shortly, but specifically if you have a Book of the Month subscription, I mean, that's a pretty good price. So that is not a sponsorship for Book of the Month. I don't have a sponsorship with them. I just really enjoy their services. And of course, I'm really excited that an Indigenous author was featured. So, alright, so I did try to read this back in August before this book came out and found that I just wasn't going to get it read in time. So I prioritized other books on my TBR and just kind of put a pause on this and then picked it back up for Indigathon. And Buddy read it with Kim from Native Lady Book Warrior. Yes, I don't know why I have trouble with that every time, but Buddy read it with Kim and I tabbed it up. We had some really good discussions on this book and I was really excited. So I also didn't want to post my review until I chatted with her about it. I know that both of us have been pretty busy with the holidays coming up. So it was just kind of, I think it was difficult on both our parts, but yeah. So I'm glad that we were able to talk about it though, as we were, I think, help solidify some of our thoughts. And I also just like bouncing my thoughts and feelings of books off other people to see like if it resonated the same or if I'm not seeing a perspective that they are. So that's always fun. So this book, Winter Counts, follows Virgil Wounded Horse, who is on the Rosebud Indian Reservation. He is Lakota, and he's a vigilante of sorts. When the legal system doesn't serve justice on the reservation, Virgil is the person that everyone calls. So if tribal police can't or won't give justice to a particular person, or if the FBI can't or most likely won't serve justice, then Virgil's the guy to call. So he's a bit of a bruiser and speaks more with his fists than with words. So when a councilman ends up coming to Virgil to try and figure out to get him to figure out how hard drugs are coming onto the reservation, Virgil's not really interested. Virgil is on the mindset that like drugs are going to happen. There have been opioids on the reservation for years, same as with alcohol. So he figures that hard drugs aren't necessarily like, it was bound to happen. So he denies the councilman, but the councilman definitely wants this stopped, as he knows it's going to be an issue later on. And sure enough, this becomes personal for Virgil as his nephew ends up overdosing on these harder drugs. I believe it's heroin and fentanyl. Finding the person who's bringing these hard drugs onto the reservation has become very personal to Virgil, as he's been taking care of his nephew for years. And with the help of his ex-girlfriend, they go and try to figure out who's bringing these hard drugs on and how to stop it. So with that synopsis in mind for this book, there are some content warnings for mentions of drug use and drug abuse, mention of alcohol abuse. There is a death of a child, so bear that in mind. Mention of colonization, mention of sexual assault. It's mentioned in the beginning. There's also injury and death and gun violence. Some graphic depictions, and there's also mention of torture. So I'll leave all the content warnings down in my description down below as well. If there's more that I can't think of right now that I will later, I'll definitely leave that in the description down below as well. So just for you to keep in mind before, if you're sensitive to any of those topics before you get into this book. I know particularly the death of a child did affect some people, and a lot of us weren't aware of it, of that content until we were reading it. So I tabbed up this book quite a bit. These ones are just to mark the chapters, but these ones here are my thoughts and notes, really. I don't write in the book, but each color represents some kind of emotion or something that I feel like I wanted to remember and wanted to remember my feelings towards it. So this book, I thought, was really well done in terms of the fact that David Heska Wandley-Wyden is a lawyer and kind of goes into some of those nuances that maybe some don't understand or know about life on the reservation, particularly when it comes to jurisdiction of tribal police versus federal government. When there are crimes on a reservation, it goes to federal government, not state. And I believe David mentions this in the book of a lot of what the FBI doesn't do anything below a felony. So a lot of sexual assault cases and domestic abuse cases and child abuse cases and sexual assault towards child abuse cases don't get prosecuted because it's not worth their time, but like they jump on drug cases. So it's that I appreciated. It was fairly reflective, I feel like, in terms of what we experience here. I know here in particular, the reservations that we have try to work with the county, mostly to try to get our tribal police deputized. So it was interesting to hear it from this perspective as I thought about some of the issues we have here, particularly during the pandemic, as quite a few of the reservations here tried to close down the reservations completely because people on the coast were trying to go to the reservations or go through the reservations to escape the city, if you can call any of the towns here cities, to escape people, but they really posed a danger to some of our elders and our communities as people were going to the wilderness to escape the pandemic or whatever. So a lot of our reservations wanted to shut down completely. The problem with that is that there are state highways going through them, so that became an issue in terms of jurisdiction. So they couldn't completely close down. So that was interesting, something that I reflected on while reading this book, because the jurisdiction aspect is just like, it sounds really tedious, but it affects us more than you would think. So that's something I appreciated, as well as Virgil in himself. So we follow Virgil's perspective throughout this whole book, and he is definitely a character that I see in my community in terms of there's certain things that he does that reminds me of either friends that I know or like relatives. He's very interesting in terms of, I can think of several people, not all of them quite fitting his character, but like I can see those issues in our community. So Virgil is very much someone who talks more with his fists than he does with words, and doesn't quite know how to express words, his feelings through words. He also has this disconnect from his culture. He doesn't quite believe in it. He ultimately just wants a better life for his nephew, and he doesn't feel like that's on the reservation, despite his community trying to like get him to believe in their culture, in wanting him to, both of them, Virgil and his nephew, to connect with the culture, and that ultimately that's what's going to propel them forward, which is something that we've been trying to resonate here locally as well. Virgil also has had alcohol addiction in the past, and he is a recovering alcoholic, so it was nice, it was kind of a positive thing about him. Like, his whole character was definitely complex and interesting, and we get a lot of his why he has some of these issues throughout the whole book, and I really appreciated that. I think my main issue was actually his ex-girlfriend, Marie. I never quite understood how to feel about her, just because they were definitely on different sides of the spectrum in terms of Virgil just being like wanting the best for his reservation but kind of giving up on it. Really, he wants the best for himself and his nephew, and he does it how he can. He really looks at the negative side of the reservation. He definitely kind of represents this like negative side of the reservation of like a native community, or like the negative sides of what it means to be Indigenous, while Marie kind of perpetuates this privileged Indigenous side in terms of she definitely came from money, and although like she experienced some things on the reservation as well in terms of things that affected her identity, she definitely has this positivity of wanting to change the reservation for the better and be have this positive outlook on the Native community. However, it's in a way that is very much, we need to do this now, but like not really thinking how everyone else is going to be able to do it. Just because she can readily, because she has the privilege to be able to do so, not everybody else does. So that was definitely interesting. And both those characters, I feel like I've met in my life and in one form or another. Definitely like other aspects of Marie that I'm like, she would like say or do something that made me question, like, what are you doing? Specifically, like at one point, we know that Virgil is a recovering alcoholic, and at one point they have to go into a bar, and he's kind of like, I don't think that's a good idea, and she's like, oh, it's just a bar, like what's the harm in that? And it's like, that's really terrible to say to a recovering alcoholic. Like, what? So like there were certain things that it was interesting because she would look at the positivity and good that could be going on in the community, but on an individual level she was kind of like not ignorant, but like willfully rude or something. It's very willfully ignorant of like the person's situation. So it became this like weird aspect of like, I kind of enjoyed her, but there were times where I'm like, I don't understand where you're coming from or why you're doing this thing. I don't trust you. So this book is a thriller, and it's marketed as a thriller, but as Jesse from Bowties and Books had said, that if you're used to thrillers, that this may be a little slow paced in some areas, and I agree with that in terms of like, I think in the middle in certain areas there are some slow bits, and then by about this point where I stopped tabbing is where it really starts getting going. I personally felt that it was kind of easy to guess what was going to happen. It didn't quite go in the way that I had originally anticipated. However, the end result was still like, yeah, I believe that. Like, that makes sense. I think what was disappointing though is that it took Virgil a little longer than expected. Even though it was kind of like spelled out in front of him, he still had a hard time believing it. What I really enjoyed was Virgil's connection with his nephew. That I felt was really just heartwarming and nerve-wracking because of what happens in this book. Not to give away too many spoilers. So in that aspect, I really enjoyed it. And the ending, I really enjoyed the ending of this in particular. It was so heartwarming and just needed. And it's like, it makes me so relieved that Virgil was able to come full circle, really. There was so much growth there. So I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars, I believe. From what I hear, there's supposed to be a sequel to this, which I'm not sure how I feel about. Like, I would definitely read more from David Heska Wadley-Wyden. I just don't know if this book in particular needs a sequel, just because I felt like it was tied up pretty neatly. I'd still probably check it out. Though I hear it's from Marie's perspective, which I also don't feel... I don't know. I will see. I'll probably still get it, still read it, though I'm really hoping Marie grows. Because that was definitely one thing in that I felt like Marie didn't have much growth in here aside from figuring out what she really wanted to do. I feel like her attitude and some of her actions were still just like, I didn't get enough of a growth from her. I didn't see evidence enough of a growth from her. So maybe that's what the next book will be about. I have no idea. So yeah, that is my review of Winter Counts by David Haskell-Wanbley-Weiden. If you have not checked it out, I definitely highly suggest that you do. If you have read it, let me know what your thoughts were down in the comments below. Please, no spoilers. Otherwise, I'm on other social media, Goodreads, Twitter, and Instagram. And yeah, if this is your first time watching me, please be sure to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and click the little bell icon if you want to see more from me. Otherwise, I will have some race awareness links down in my description down below as well. I try to leave a couple in there for every video. I try to have it kind of pertaining to some of the topics in the video. For this one, I will still leave up my MMIW, Murdered Missing Indigenous Women, Girls in Two-Spirit, information, shareable links, and donation links down in the description down below, as well as others. Not to say that anything that I don't put in there is not important. Just be sure to do your research. Just be aware of what's going on in the world. There are consistently injustices going on. Please be a positive and do your research. Share and donate where you can. The pandemic is still happening where I am currently. So I please suggest that you stay home, wear a mask, and wash your hands if you do decide to go out. Stay 6 feet apart. And otherwise, I hope that you are in the mental mindset to enjoy your reading, and I will see you again soon. Chew.